Hi guys, and welcome back to Autism Journeys radio show and podcast. I'm absolutely delighted to have Claire O'Neill as guest here today. So Claire is an autistic deputy principal and special educational needs coordinator, or SENCO, in an Irish primary school. She's a qualified and experienced primary and secondary school teacher, and she has a first class honours postgraduate diplomas in both special education and in educational leadership. She's also currently in the final year of a scholarship for a master's in education in autism studies specifically. Claire is a health and wellbeing associate with the Professional Development Services for Teachers, the PDST, where she facilitates training for teachers and school leaders. She also coaches neurodivergent adults. Coaching, restorative practices and positive education influence her teaching and leadership style. Claire writes using a strengths-based approaches and with autistic individuals, and she has 2 writing projects in progress with Jessica Kingsley Publishers at present. Claire lives with her autistic husband and her 2 autistic children. Hi Claire, thank you so much for agreeing to have a conversation with me today.
Thanks Sharon, it's lovely to be here and thanks for having me.
Fantastic. I know I've been trying to nab you for quite some time, so this is long overdue, do you know?
Yeah.
Claire, just before we begin, would you mind putting yourself in context for my listeners, please?
Yeah, thanks for the lovely introduction there, Sharon. And, you know, to put myself in context for your show today, I think the biggest bit of experience that I bring to the interview today is my experience as an autistic individual. I suppose, you know, I would have been an autistic child, an autistic young adult, and now I'm an autistic adult. And in my family life, you know, both my children are autistic and my husband is autistic. So I'm living with autistic people all the time and work with autistic people during the day. So yeah, I'm very passionate about promoting autistic voice, and I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be speaking about autism here today with you, Sharon.
Fantastic. Claire, can I ask you, as an autistic teacher, in your experience, what advantages or benefits has your autism had in relation to your teaching style?
Yeah, many advantages, Sharon. I suppose number one is empathy. I can really empathize with my autistic pupils. So for example, you know, if a student is wearing a hood, I wouldn't see that as a child being defiant or being in, you know, fighting against a uniform policy. There's probably some sensory issues going on there. For a child that you know, isn't engaging with school, I would kind of look to see what their energy levels are like. You know, do they need a rest break, or is it a movement break that they need? I just have an understanding of the autistic experience in a very busy school environment. Also, I can use that knowledge to kind of inform staff members about what it may be like for the autistic child in our school, and also my experience as an autistic parent. I find that I can really empathize with the parents of autistic children. I understand their concerns, and usually that results in kind of very productive support plan meetings and communication between home and school.
Fabulous. And I suppose, Claire, in your role as a SENCO, then I would assume that part of that role would inform other staff members' understanding of autistic children and of how to navigate maybe that parent-staff member relationship, so to speak.
Yeah, I suppose I can add kind of another dimension to those meetings and the planning that's involved, and you know, oftentimes parents of autistic children, by the time the child gets to us in primary, they've been through years of really hard advocating for their child. There may be an element of burnout involved, maybe an element of trauma involved, and then it's up to us as professionals to really support those parents in the journey through primary school, and to be really understanding and empathetic, and also to listen to the expertise that the parent and the autistic child can bring to support plan meetings.
Fantastic. Claire, I'm aware that you teach both mainstream and autistic children. What kind of things do you put in place naturally to support neurodiverse children in your classroom? And how beneficial do you find these to be for non-autistic children sharing that learning space?
Yeah, I suppose I'm very influenced by universal design, and the number one thing that I think helps neurodivergent children and neurotypical children would be having a very positive school climate and culture. So how we enact this in our school is we follow restorative practices, which are a set of practices and beliefs that value relationships and also give us a toolkit for when conflict does arise in school. So the neurodivergent children in our care and also the neurotypical children will see adults modelling very positive and respectful relationships. And I think that's the cornerstone, it's the foundation of what we do in my school. Then in terms of other practicalities, I suppose, I would spend quite a bit of time at the start of the school year in particular conducting sensory audits and environmental audits to make sure that classrooms are as sensory friendly and supportive as they can be. And this definitely supports our neurodivergent pupils, but also our neurotypical pupils. Having consistency, having routines is also really important. Visual supports, I think, benefit everyone. They can be essential for some neurodivergent children, but they do benefit every child. And yeah, it really is like modeling is so important. So like in terms of sensory regulation, in terms of emotional regulation, the more that adults model and are available for co-regulation, that supports neurodivergent learners, but also all learners.
Fantastic, fantastic. Claire, with regards to some of the strategies that you've mentioned around kind of sensory regulation and support and kind of sensory well-being and so on,
Yeah.
with regards to those kind of temporal structures like those visual schedules and so on and so forth, how do you implement them, and how would the implementation differ between like for that of a young child versus that of an older child and so on?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good question, Sharon. So if we take the example of implementing visual supports, I suppose if a child is new to our school, I would check with the parents, are they already using visual supports at home? What has worked well? What has not worked well? And I think that that idea of sharing what's going on at home with school is so important. Consistency in visuals is important. I would start slowly with visuals. I would see what areas of the school day does the child need support with and introduce visuals very slowly. From a purely practical point of view, I probably don't go laminating my visuals very quickly. I try them out a bit, and you can always reprint them and reprint them and laminate them when you know that they're going to be effective. I tend to shy away from say pre-made visuals. You know, I try and individualize them as much as possible for the individual. The difference between younger and older pupils then, you know, I still think the visual element of a visual is important. So like, you know, I'd earn the side of caution and stick with kind of pictorial visuals for as long as possible. But sometimes children can get a bit self-conscious about visuals. So that might be moving onto like a little LCD kind of etch-a-sketch type board, or even moving on to assistive technology where you might have visuals and schedules on a tablet, you know, and have them more discreet, or even have them in a diary. But I think really what's important is an individualized approach to use visuals where the greatest area of need is, and you know, not to kind of get over enthusiastic with you know, designing and laminating visuals at the start. Really see what works first before you commit to a visual.
Fantastic. And I suppose I'd always kind of think about having a conversation not just with the parent, but also with the young person about what they're most comfortable with.
Absolutely,
You know?
definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
I kind of think that
Yeah.
sometimes kiddos, they absolutely need that level of support. They do
Yeah.
need that visual piece,
Mm.
but they do feel so self-conscious that they're not willing to engage. And it might be something as simple as yellow post-it notes, sticking up yellow post-it
Yeah.
notes, and so on and so forth.
Absolutely.
So whatever
Yeah.
is what I suppose we have to be mindful
Mm.
too, and I've no doubt that you agree that we have to take note of the child as a whole, and
Absolutely.
take note of their needs, but also how comfortable or uncomfortable they are, and so on. Do you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, Sharon. Yeah.
Do you
Mm.
know? Claire, can I ask you, so in general, in your experience, what does a supportive environment for all kiddos look like?
Okay, so yeah, it's back to relationships. It's back to adults really modeling positive, constructive and caring relationships. And I think it's really, really important, you know, for a child to know that they're cared for, and that they matter, and that they belong. So recent research by Craig Goodall showed that young autistic individuals really felt that inclusion was a feeling rather than a place. So
Yeah.
that feeling of belonging is really important. And on a very practical level, how we make children feel like they belong is by giving them a voice. For example, letting them co-construct group contracts with their teacher and SNAs, make, you know, things like having conversation circles where everybody gets a chance to speak. You know, being involved in the decision making of a classroom and in a school community is really important. You know, having adults that recognize your strengths, your individual talents, your individual interests is really important, and also celebrating successes and sharing successes is so important. And when it does come to difficulties and challenges, that these are seen as opportunities to grow. And the idea of a growth mindset, I think, is really important, and that all of us will have challenges, all of us will have difficulties, all of us will make mistakes. It's what we do with these challenges and mistakes and even failures, and how we grow from them is really important.
Fantastic. I suppose, essentially speaking, the word that comes to mind when you share what you've just shared, Claire, is empowerment of that young person to
Mm-hmm.
be their authentic selves, pretty
Yeah.
much. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, Sharon. And like, you know, everybody in a school community is an individual, and like really celebrating each person's individuality is really key to any child feeling like, our adults feeling like they belong to a school community.
absolutely. Absolutely. Claire, generally speaking, in your opinion, how can non-autistic staff support autistic children and young people in schools?
Yeah. Sharon, first of all, I think it's important for staff to get to know the child really well, get to know their strengths, their interests, you know, down to basic things like their favorite color, do they have pets, their favorite meals, all. So relationship building is really, really important, you know, at the start of a relationship. And I think also using tools like my thoughts about school questionnaire, maybe using that as a semi-structured interview. Peter Vermeulen's good feeling questionnaire is another really good information gathering tool. I would be using those tools to form a really solid, complete picture of the child. Then another area that's really important, and this comes up in research again and again, is that children often feel that adults in schools don't have a great deal of understanding of what it is to be an autistic individual, and don't have a lot of knowledge, knowledge about autism. Again, Craig Goodall's research would have spoken to this a bit. So it's really seeing, is your continuing professional development, is it up to date? Have you got really good training, ideally from autistic or neurodivergent trainers, you know, so is your knowledge up to date? And if your understanding of autistic individuals isn't up to, you know, isn't quite where it should be, making that real effort to get to know the child, to understand the child. You know, then there is evidence-based approaches. Some I use, some I don't, but like having a knowledge of some of the, will I say, the more supportive and beneficial evidence-based approaches, like comic strips, conversations, social stories, having a good professional knowledge of those evidence-based strategies that work is really helpful as well.
Fantastic, fantastic. Claire, can I ask you then, how can non-autistic people adjust their communication in general to support autistic children?
Yeah, I think this is where understanding and knowledge has to improve. So a lot of training courses that are still currently running will talk about theory of mind difficulties in autistic people, but the research has moved on, and so I would say to upskill, learn more about Damien Milton's double empathy problem, and learn more from researchers like Sue Fletcher-Watson, Carrie Ann Morrison, Catherine Compton, Brett Hiesman, Noah Sasson. All of these researchers have really uncovered really exciting information about autistic communication. And I suppose in essence, what we are learning is that autistic communication isn't less, it isn't something that necessarily needs to be fixed. Autistic people communicate differently to neurotypical people. So when we are communicating with autistic people, there is onus on the autistic person, but also on the non-autistic person to adapt their communication. You know, it's very hard to generalize, but if I was to make a few generalizations, we were only talking about eye contact before the interview, Sharon. Do not insist on eye contact. You know, consider asynchronous communication. You know, sometimes autistic people will need that bit more time to process. You know, you're unlikely to be phoning your autistic pupils, but like in my experience, and I don't have research to back this up except my own experience, autistic people generally hate phone calls. Generally, you know, I've very rarely come across an autistic person that likes a phone call. So like consider written forms of communication and asynchronous communication. And also if you have social groups that have autistic and non-autistic children, it's really important for the non-autistic children to learn about autistic communication style and preference. You know, even for non-autistic peers to learn a bit more about how many autistic children love to info dump about their favorite topics, you know, and just to allow your conversation partner have that info dump, because it's so rewarding and so important for the autistic individual. But again, it is getting to know each individual and their communication preferences.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I suppose you mentioned that info dumping piece, Claire, there, and I know one little person in this house that when we are going to school, when we were driving for the duration of the car drive, every single day, there is the opportunity to share every fact you can think of, imaginable, in relation to dinosaurs. So everything they know, and it actually sets them up so well for the day. So there's a real well-being piece to being allowed to, or being facilitated to be able to share around your special interest. For autistic young people, definitely, do you know? And Claire, that leads beautifully into my next question, actually. So I suppose I'm very aware of the importance of peer education and that kind of leveling up, to steal Jacqueline Feedy and Amy Lawrence phrase, I suppose to level up a non-autistic young person's level of understanding of autism and their autistic peer. How do you implement this and ensure responsibility for that understanding doesn't lie solely with the autistic child within a person's school setting?
Yeah, again, it can be hard to generalize here. Say, for example, in my school, a lot of our autistic pupils are not aware of their diagnosis, which can be problematic when you're trying to create kind of that open culture. So what I would concentrate on as a teacher is our strengths and also things that we find challenging. So each person in a classroom will have strengths and will have challenges, and that's what makes us you know, unique, and that's what makes a classroom kind of such a rich place, because we are bringing all these different experiences. So I think you know, if you have autistic children in your classroom and they're aware of their diagnosis, I think being very open about neurodiversity, speaking about neurodiversity, you know, highlighting neurodivergent role models. I'm thinking of Simone Biles in the Olympics recently, who spoke out about you know, taking her ADHD medication and being proud of the fact that she's an ADHDer. You know, having those open conversations is really important, and kind of, you know, it reduces stigma. There should be no stigma. In my school, we really work from a neurodiversity paradigm, and I think that's really helpful. And part of that, and I think this helps the non-autistic children, we have run information sessions for all parents in the school on neurodiversity. And just as I'm speaking to you now, I think that's something that maybe we should roll out for our children. The more aware they are about neurodiversity and different types of brains, you know, the more inclusive our school is going to be, and the more inclusive our children are going to be leaving our school for post-primary and beyond.
Absolutely. I think that's a really good idea, Claire, I suppose, isn't it? Just to kind of, and I suppose not just to focus on a child who is autistic, and this is the autistic child and so on, but actually looking at that strength. So every person in the world has strengths. Every person has capacity, and every person has areas where they require an additional support in order to kind of achieve or whatever. And just focusing on that, just focusing on that, I suppose it definitely will equip young people with the knowledge that everybody is absolutely wonderful, wonderfully unique, and absolutely wonderful just as they are. Do you know?
Yeah. And actually, Sharon, as you're saying that, something that comes to mind is, I think, you know, picture books are such a powerful way to explore this as well. And, you know, it wouldn't take much research to find picture books that celebrate diversity in all its forms. You know, there is a book, We Are Wonders, based on the novel Wonder, and that's a lovely starting point for a conversation about differences, about diversity, and about inclusion.
Yeah, and actually I came across only today the We 15, is it what Jeepers, it's the new there's a kind of a new movement to indicate, because apparently 15% of the world's population are individuals who are disabled, and I think it's We the 15 actually is the hashtag, and there's some fantastic real life images of individuals who have very kindly shared that are free to download, that indicate what diversity might look like in general. Individuals who are wheelchair users, individuals who are blind, individuals with certain facial features, and so on and so forth. And it's just, I suppose it's really important. We can make picture books. If people can't access picture books that they feel are appropriate, we can make them. Do you know? But I think it's a wonderful, wonderful idea, absolutely wonderful idea, to use those kind of tools to be able to set, to be able to, I suppose, help educate our young people coming up behind us as well, do you know?
Yeah.
Claire, can I ask you as well? We mentioned previously special interest, so like we both know how important areas of special interest can be for an autistic child or adult. How can we as parents, educators, and support people in general ensure that we are nurturing these special interests?
Yeah, I think first of all, to just value the special interest for what it is, and to understand what the special interest can be doing for the young person. So it's not only that they're interested in facts, say about, if we use the example of dinosaurs, but it's very soothing for the individual to speak about their special interest. It can be, you know, the autistic individual can lose themselves in their special interest, you know, very tied in with that idea of the monotropic mind,
Yeah.
so that attentional
Yeah.
tunneling down into the special interests. So it can be very calming, it can be very emotionally regulating to be involved in a special interest. So just to value the special interest for the sake of it being a special interest.
Yeah.
And then being a teacher, I always look for ways then that you can adapt the special interest.
Absolutely.
So for example, it's just an amazing tool to have. If a child in your room has a special interest at the moment, you know, just really harness it, you know, go for it, you know, so like if it is, say, Thomas the Tank would be a common one down, say, the infant room, you know, have Thomas the Tank worksheets, you know, teach emotions through Thomas the Tank, or teach them through dinosaurs, whatever the special interest is.
Yeah.
For an older child, project-based work and thematic work can be hugely beneficial. So maybe teach a skill like mind mapping by using a special interest, or ask the child if a child wants to work on their kind of presentation skills or build their self-confidence in public speaking. A PowerPoint presentation or a Prezi on a special interest can be really interesting, you know. You know, if you want to enhance their writing, maybe write or email to you know, a paleontology museum if it's still dinosaurs. Like, really harness that special interest. Again, for older pupils and even post-primary students, you know, see if there's career pathways based on special interests. You know, that I suppose there's endless options with special interests. And one thing I will say about special interests as well is checking in with the child or the young person to see, are they happy calling their special interest a special interest?
Yeah.
I personally like the phrase special interest. I haven't always liked it, but I have heard less kind ways to describe special interests, like obsessions, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, be careful, language matters. So passions, Barry Present calls them enthusiasms,
Yeah.
you know, but check in with the young person what they like. But I think special interests is lovely, because that is what is special to that person.
Absolutely. And I suppose when you mentioned project-based work, Claire, what comes to mind for me is one of my older young people who in primary school would have struggled with a different kind of learning challenges and so on. And actually one of the greatest successes of his later years in primary school was that he created this absolutely amazing project around kind of machines. Machines were his area of special interest at that time. Created this wonderful project, but actually not only did he create it, he had to do all the research. He had to write the sentences. He had to source images. He had to do whatever. And then he was so impassioned for a very shy kid, for this kid who would be very, very shy and unassuming. He went and he presented it to every class in the school. And he presented it with such enthusiasm. So I suppose it speaks, in my experience at least, it speaks to that harnessing of that interest and absolutely propelling a young person forward. And I suppose equipping them with alternative ways to navigate areas where they might potentially have difficulty otherwise, and so on. So I mean, they can be absolute tools for empowering the child.
Absolutely, and that's a great example, Sharon, you know, and I'm sure your fella remembers that that experience. Yeah.
And I suppose even leading into junior certs and leaving certs afterwards, there wasn't that same anxiety around the project-based work and the presentations and so on that he would have had to do, because he knew that actually, well, you know, I'm kind of good at this. I managed it before. So, you know, there was that lovely kind of sense of self-worth that was associated with it as well, which is really, really good, you know, and which is, I suppose, something we always strive for with regards to our small people, you know. Claire, can I ask you, do you have any other suggestions on how my listeners might be able to meet a child's needs holistically within the classroom?
You know, I think it really starts with the mindset of the adults in the room, you know, having that warm, caring, optimistic mindset is really important. If you are in a classroom that has an SNA, using that relationship to model warm, positive relationships, again, having very clear and consistent routines with a degree of flexibility, harnessing the strengths and the interests of everybody in the room, and trying to set up that idea of community in the room is so important. Then it is kind of really using the skills that we learn, like, you know, like observation, reading reports, asking parents, asking young people, what is it that they need? So like those kind of assessment tools, I suppose, shouldn't just be done at the start of the year. I think being reflective on what's happening and checking in with the young people in your room is so important. You know, check in, and, you know, teach them how to give feedback to you, you know. So a lot of young people might feel that they're being rude or cheeky by giving teachers constructive feedback. So often what I would do is teach a very simple way of giving feedback, and that might be, it's called tag. So like, tell me something good about what I'm doing as your teacher.
Okay.
Ask me a question. So it might be like, why do you always ask me loads of news on a Monday morning? And then give a suggestion. I would like
Good.
if you gave more golden time during the week. I'd like if golden time wasn't just on Fridays. You know, so I think teaching those ways of giving feedback to teachers, so it's not just a one-way process in a room, is really important. Like when you're thinking of a holistic approach, if you have children in your room that absolutely need movement and sensory and rest breaks, build them in for everybody. I don't know anybody who doesn't benefit from movement breaks or rest breaks or even sensory breaks. Build them in. Also, always keeping in mind that some people in your room may need them more than others, but build them in so that they're not just a thing that a few children do. Look at your seating options in a room. Make sure there's a range of seating options and that they're not just available for children who have say move and sit cushions mentioned in their occupational therapy reports. So that idea of universal design for learning is also really important for if you're interested in being a holistic educator. And I think looking at every area of the curriculum and seeing how you can incorporate strengths and interests, and how you can make it relevant and meaningful for every child in the room.
Fantastic.
Yeah, just a few ideas.
Fantastic. Thanks. I'll be stealing the suggestion for tag myself, if you don't mind. Definitely.
Yeah, it's a
Good.
good one.
Great.
Yeah,
It's a really good
yeah,
one and an easy one to remember too.
yeah,
Claire, one area of difficulty that arises again and again from many autistic children, and obviously adults who might be attending college or in the workplace, is dealing with the
yeah,
expectations of and demands being placed upon them when they have to engage with group activities, and that kind of
yeah,
group work activities, not knowing what the
yeah,
demands are, not knowing what the expected outcome might be, and so on. Can you
yeah.
offer an insight on how we can best set individuals up for success in these situations?
Yeah, I really can, and I can bring first-hand experience to that, Sharon, because I would have struggled hugely with group work, and I think a lot of what it is it's on uncertainties, and it's also heightened social expectations.
Yeah.
So first of all, the more explicit you make the rules and conventions of group work, the better. So spend time teaching group work. I know when I introduced a reading project called Bridges of Understanding to my school, I would have gathered and borrowed other teachers, and we would have modelled group work for pupils.
Okay.
And that's not just for neurodivergent pupils or autistic pupils, that was for every pupil, to see us turn taking, giving time for others to give their responses.
Yeah.
And that was very helpful. Allocating more adults if you can, and I know how crunched schools are for adult helpers, to kind of model and to help and to facilitate group work is really important as well. Having assigned roles for group work can be really, really helpful. So like obvious roles would be reporter, recorder, secretary, you know, question asker, you know, they're just having those assigned roles and assigning a role that you feel the child, say the autistic child would do well in, is really important. So like, you know, if they have, say, assistive technology and they're a confident typer, maybe they would be the recorder, but that they wouldn't be the reporter unless they like doing that. So having roles kind of assigned in the beginning is definitely a huge help. Put time limits on, say, on group work and stick to them, be true to them, because that adds in certainty. Having visual supports is really helpful, like name badges, sand timers, worksheets that they follow, like say tag that we mentioned, having like a visual that explains tag, so that they have a real structure in how to give feedback in group work. And also something that can often be overlooked when you have neurodivergent children in a classroom with sensitivities, and even for neurodivergent adults, sometimes when you're setting up group work, especially if there's several different groups, the sensory impact of that is significant. You know, scraping chairs along lino, moving chairs, moving people out of their kind of safe space. Take all of that into consideration when you're including neurodivergent people in group work. So maybe, if possible, move the group around where they're sitting. It just creates more certainty for the neurodivergent individual. Maybe the neurodivergent individual goes to do a job elsewhere while all the scraping of the furniture is going on. That, I think, that sets someone up for success, because they don't have all that loud, jarring sensory input before the group work begins. They're just a few ideas.
Great. And I suppose, Claire, the other thing that I would oftentimes suggest as well is sometimes ensuring that the person is knocked out, that there isn't that kind of insistence that they absolutely have to. Sometimes it needs to be okay for children or adults to just be in proximity to the group and to be involved just by listening or whatever, because I suppose if you insist upon somebody speaking or whatever the case may be, I suppose we induce trauma, and the last thing we want is to cause that kind of traumatic experience, because then they're not going to be set up for success. So I suppose reading the room and kind of knowing where the child's comfort levels lie, I suppose that speaks to the attunement piece that you spoke about earlier as well.
Absolutely. And Sharon, that's such a good point. And I think kind of pre-teaching, or kind of like just saying that from the outset, that there is an option to pass. And kind of related to that I forgot to say, having several different ways to bring back information from the group, so that it's not always just verbal. So even having paddles with yes or no, or I'm unsure, having walking debates, there's several different ways of getting feedback, and verbal shouldn't be the only method. And I absolutely think that's a great point, Sharon, the option to pass or to sit out group work, because I know firsthand how, and you use the word trauma, and I know you wouldn't use it lightly. It can be traumatic, and group work can be traumatic.
Absolutely.
So yeah.
Perfect. Claire, I suppose an extension of that then, by extension, how can we foster a good sense of self and self-esteem with autistic children and in autistic children, I suppose, to ensure that kind of that mental well-being piece, that kind of ensure well-being as that young person grows and becomes an adult?
So important, Sharon, and I have a few ideas of my own around this. I am a huge advocate for children hearing about neurodiversity from a very young age. You know, if a child is fortunate enough to have that early diagnosis, that they, even if you haven't shared the diagnosis with the child, that at least they're hearing about neurodivergence in a very positive way in the home. You know, that they might be reading books with neurodivergent role models in them, that, you know, that people, I'm just picking from air now, like, you know, actors like Anthony Hopkins, you know, that it's mentioned, oh yeah, he's neurodivergent and he's so successful, just that it's dropped casually into conversation. I am in favour of children knowing about their diagnosis early, and that there's open conversation about their diagnosis. I think that really gives them information about themselves.
Yeah.
Away from the diagnosis, I think children knowing about their strengths is really, really important. So like strengths come in many different forms. An area of strengths that I work with a lot would be character strengths. So you mentioned the Clifton one before we were interviewing here. The VIA character strengths is another set of strengths. There are free tools that you can assess. You can assess your child's strengths, usually from about the age of 10. But like, talk about their strengths, nurture their strengths, and make them proud of their strengths. That will really increase feelings of self-efficacy and self-worth and self-esteem. I think kind of establishing a growth mindset is really important. So knowing that you're good enough, knowing that mistakes are a sign that you're trying, you know, is really important. In general well-being, I think the kind of the basics are really important, and some of them can be extra challenging when you are neurodivergent. But things like sleep routines, you know, self-care like washing, teeth brushing, hair brushing,
Yeah.
all of that. I know there can be so many challenges there, but as much as possible to kind of encourage good self-care, you know, as much as possible as it is with restrictive eating, to have a balanced diet and the great outdoors. I think getting outside for some kind of physical activity every day is so important to kind of encourage well-being and habits for a lifetime.
Fantastic, fantastic. I suppose just one note as an aside, almost, Claire, just to put in there as well, is that I would absolutely agree that it's really important that children are aware of their autism diagnosis or identity as early as possible, and that it would be wonderful if parents could share that with their children sooner rather than later. I suppose just one word of warning in that, or one word of caution rather, is that it's really important that the parent, to any parent listening in, to know that that it will impact positively for a child to hear that they are autistic if you are in a good space and if you are comfortable with that.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you're not,
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
be, it can actually have the opposite effect to what we actually
Yeah.
want. So I suppose
Yeah.
it's really important that a parent is comfortable and has kind of settled with the
Absolutely.
idea that their child is
Yeah.
autistic before
Yeah.
they impart that information. Would you agree?
I absolutely agree. And like, getting a diagnosis in a family, it's very much a process, and time is a very important factor. So, you know, how I feel now about my diagnosis, my children's diagnosis, my husband's diagnosis, is very different to how I felt when, you know, each of us got a diagnosis, you know. And every diagnosis I felt very differently, and you know, I wouldn't have been in a place for, you know, in the weeks or months after my children's diagnosis, to have a really positive, kind of complete kind of conversation with them. So my advice, which I'm sure is your advice, Sharon, is like to be gentle with yourself, educate yourself, and see how the diagnosis sits with you. Make sure it sits kind of comfortably with you before you start discussing it with your child.
Yeah,
Would you think
absolutely.
that would be? Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I just think that it's very important that, like, to go back to that attunement piece for a second, that it's a
Yeah.
child, like that co-regulation piece, that you can't regulate, you can't help regulate another individual if you're not feeling
Yeah.
regulated yourself, and by
Yeah.
extension you can't really share positive information with a positive spin if you're not feeling so positive about it yourself.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
it's really important that you do that. It is, I kind of think that it really is important that we share information when you are in a space where you view it as a
Absolutely.
positive
Yeah.
attribute, so to speak, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that
Absolutely.
process takes different time for different people, like different lengths of time for different people,
Yeah.
depending
You
or
can't
whatever,
put a
you know.
time.
No,
Yeah.
no. So you know yourself. I suppose one of the one piece of advice I was given as a parent of a young person who was identified at much older, if that makes sense. So we've had like at different ages and stages and so on, in our home where children were identified and so on. And one piece of advice that was given to me actually was that if you're uncertain, and if things are sitting well and stuff, and if you're uncertain, uncertain, that it's really important that you just sprinkle it into conversation,
Yeah.
as you said.
Yeah.
But if you're really, really uncertain, if your young person starts questioning why they can or can't do something, that then it is about introducing it as a real positive, that actually that this is why you are so amazing at acquiring and retaining all of this information about dinosaurs, for example, and so on. So I suppose it's important that people individualize how that information is shared as well.
Absolutely.
But I suppose ultimately, if you've got a little person, bringing that word in from the get-go, because then there's nothing negative. It is just what it is, almost. You know. So Claire, can I ask you, how do we support the development of emotional awareness and regulation skills in autistic children, in your opinion?
Yeah, so it's such an important area. And if I kind of start with my teacher hat on first, Sharon, I would say to teachers to really, again, the positive culture and climate of the school is absolutely key. And we actually have a good SPHE curriculum, so that's social, personal, health education. So to teach that SPHE curriculum really well. You know, there's plenty of training and support in SPHE. It's an area of the curriculum that's being developed at the moment. Teach that well. With my teacher hat on, I would say that there are some excellent programs available. Some will be recommended in reports. Sharon, yourself and myself have had a conversation about Level Up. You know, what is good about that program is that there is autistic input into the program. You know, a really good program if teachers were looking for a particular program. I am a fan of zones of regulation. It needs to be adapted for each individual, but the zones of regulation can be adapted to teach whole class and whole school as well. So I'm in favour of that program. One that's an oldie but a goodie that's in a lot of OT reports is the alert program, or how does your engine run? And that's a good program as well. Away from programs, again, using picture books, using real life examples. I'm not in favor of these visuals of different facial expressions to express emotions, because for a few different reasons. Any of us don't use the same facial expressions when we're experiencing a particular emotion, and research has shown that autistic people very often have, they could have a flat effect, or they could just express emotions differently visually, if that makes sense. So I don't think they're the greatest tool to use, even though they're kind of widely available and widely used. I think naming emotions as they're happening, you know, is really important. If a child is unsure of an emotion that they're feeling, maybe being curious about it and saying, I wonder if you are feeling sad at the moment. I think this because, you know, so, you know, talking your child through emotions. Emotional coaching is another kind of program that NEPs are providing training in at the moment, that I'd recommend for schools. Two areas that I think any parent of an autistic child or a teacher should be aware of are a sensory system called interoception, and kind of a phenomenon, I suppose, called alexithymia. So if I go back to interoception is a sensory system that gives us information about internal states in our body. So, for example, our appetite, levels of alertness, our temperature, our heart rate, needing to go to the bathroom. All of those all of that sensory information can also feed into our emotional state. That sensory system is often hypo-alert or hyper-alert in neurodivergent individuals. So getting a bit of information around that is important. I think Amy Laurent has some information on that, and also another occupational therapist called Kelly Mahler. I would really read up on interoception. I think that's hugely beneficial to know about in terms of developing emotional regulation and emotional awareness in young autistic people and older autistic people. Then alexithymia is a phenomenon where where a person finds it difficult maybe to name their emotion
Mm.
or kind of identify an emotion in themselves. So I think, you know, again, you know, maybe looking into a bit more into alexithymia is important. You know, teacher knowledge and understanding is important. Parent knowledge and understanding is important. But I think at home, being open about your own emotions. You know, if you are angry, you know, say to your child, yes, I am angry right now, and I'm going to count to 10, and that usually makes me feel better. So like letting your child know what you do in a healthy, proactive way to manage your uncomfortable emotions, but also let them know that you do have uncomfortable emotions as well, and that it's okay to have these emotions.
Yeah.
Because a lot of our young people I don't think they realize sometimes that other people feel uncomfortable emotions, and that uncomfortable emotions are very appropriate in a lot of situations, but also that we can do things to kind of manage those emotions.
Yeah.
So I know that's a really long question, and it's probably something that we could talk about until the cows come home,
Yeah.
but I just hope that I've given a few little signposts there for teachers and for parents.
No, fantastic. And I suppose I love the fact that you mentioned the interoception curriculum, Kelly Maller's interoception
Yeah,
curriculum, because I suppose
yeah,
because that is only coming to the fore in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, that people are actually acknowledging the
yeah.
impact that that kind of knowledge around homeostatic and effective emotion
Mm-hmm.
has on an individual. Makes I suppose it's really important that people are aware of that. I
Yeah,
know that Kelly is doing lots and lots of training online at the moment, actually,
yeah.
for anybody who might want to
Mm-hmm.
engage with her. She's doing webinars, and she's doing
Yeah.
lots of different kind of like, she's actually delivering, I think, her whole interoception curriculum online now at the moment because of the current pandemic. I know I
Mm-hmm.
completed it about maybe coming up on 3 years ago now, and
Yeah.
I can genuinely, I recommend very few programs,
Yeah.
and I don't
Mm-hmm.
tend to recommend without experience, but I will
Yeah.
say that the interoception curriculum has been, I found it to be
Yeah.
fantastically helpful in both personal and professional
Yeah.
capacity. You mentioned as well the Autism Level Up program, Claire, and I suppose
Mm-hmm.
for individuals who present with alexithymia, that Autism Level Up program can actually be very, very helpful, because there isn't these absolutely obscure non-tangible words that are used around
Yeah.
emotion, that kind of happy, sad. What do they mean, really?
Yeah.
It instead focuses on energy levels and the energy that somebody might need to access different activities and so on. They use very cool words like fizzy and blubby
Yeah.
and so on and so forth, that
Mm-hmm.
individuals oftentimes, that I suppose that individuals absolutely relate to those feelings within their body. So I suppose it's
Yeah.
another good one to have. And I suppose the other thing actually that you mentioned that I thought was quite, it just triggered a memory, I suppose, is that you spoke about not kind of using prescriptive emotional images, and saying, look, this person is happy or this person is sad, and so
Mm-hmm.
on. And it just reminded me of a young person in this house who, for about 3 years, while they were trying to figure out what different emotions felt like and so on, if they felt sad, and if they started crying, for example, they would go and they would look at their own face in the mirror and
Yeah.
see how they looked themselves. And it
Yes.
really started with them. If they were
Yeah.
happy, they looked, and they
Mm-hmm.
used to carry this little compact mirror around with them so that they could observe
Yeah.
themselves at different
Yeah.
points throughout the day. But actually, it has definitely been cause for a really good understanding of self and kind of emotional state for her
Yeah.
as well. So I suppose
Yeah.
it's a tip that we found
Yeah.
helpful by accident, but it was
Yeah.
absolutely led by her. So it made, I suppose, therefore it's hugely effective, do you know?
Absolutely, and I think a mirror is a great resource. You know, it can be used in so many different ways, but a mirror in a classroom is fabulous, and obviously, well, most houses will have mirrors as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, great, and it's really giving kind of live information
Yeah.
back straight away. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And I suppose it's easier for a young person to relate to the emotional state of other people when they've got a good understanding of themselves. So it's really important
Absolutely,
that we
yeah.
start with ourselves first and
Yeah,
foremost, do you know?
absolutely, yeah.
Claire, going in a different direction again, what have you done within your school or educational setting to foster a whole school ethos that appreciates and respects neurodiversity and difference?
Yeah, so yeah, we've done quite a bit. I suppose we're kind of guided by kind of our core values, you know, kindness, respect, tolerance, inclusion, justice. They would be core values that we try and live by, and we try and enact these values in all our kind of school dealings. We really work hard to promote a positive school culture and climate across the whole school. Part of what we've done there is introduce restorative practices into our school, which I've spoken about earlier, and really that has given us a really good framework to kind of, you know, first of all, promote relationships. And then when there is conflict, which there always will be in an organization, that we have very healthy ways of dealing with conflict, either be it between ourselves or between the children. We have looked at our plans and policies, and we have language guidelines in our, say, our inclusion policy. So we use identity first language in our school. We are influenced by the neurodiversity movement. So we won't say that we have children with autism in our school. We say we have autistic children in our school. Now that may not be the preference of everybody in the school community, but it is the preference of the, say, the autistic individuals in the school, the majority of them anyway. So I think kind of setting your stall out and kind of saying, this is who we are. We are inclusive. We're inclusive in our policies, our actions, our curriculum, and kind of operationalizing that and kind of giving examples of what being inclusive looks like, and kind of walking the walk and talking the talk, I suppose. Sharon, is what we do.
Fabulous, fabulous. Claire, can I ask you, in your opinion then, I suppose, as an aside, we've spoken about a lot about children and so on. How can non-autistic adults support other adults who are autistic?
Yeah, in I suppose in a school or workplace setting, first of all, to kind of acknowledge that, you know, if you are in a medium to large size organisation, you're very most likely working with neurodivergent or and our autistic colleagues, you know, and just to acknowledge that that fact. If somebody discloses to you, I suppose it's somebody has gathered up quite a lot of courage to disclose, particularly in a workplace setting, and to kind of honour that and kind of see it as nearly a privilege that somebody trusts you with that information. So I think being very curious and kind of saying, well, what can I do to help you, is a really helpful question. And like, I think, you know, that answer can change over time, or the neurodivergent person mightn't have an answer for that. You know, and when they do come to you with kind of accommodations, like maybe, you know, communication, or kind of needing maybe extra breaks or whatever it might be, you know, that those accommodations, that you try and meet them wherever it's practical. To upskill and get knowledge about autism and neurodivergence, I think is really important. Yeah, and also to kind of check in with the autistic person or the neurodivergent individual to see if they're happy to be used as a resource and kind of a source of knowledge for the organisation. In everyday life, I think we all interact with neurodivergent and autistic people, and just, you know, to be open to that fact that, you know, we are everywhere, you know, so that, you know, if you are serving someone in a shop and they're not kind of, you know, going through the process as quickly as you'd like, then maybe this is somebody that needs an extra processing speed. Maybe they are in a sensory environment that's very overwhelming and they just need a bit longer at the counter, you know. To be aware of some kind of signals that people with invisible disabilities use, like sunflower lanyards, you know. Some people wear little badges with the neurodiversity symbol, which is an infinity rainbow symbol, just to be kind of aware of what's in front of you. And I think just really to treat the person as an individual and to treat the person with respect is is key.
Yeah, absolutely. Respect and kindness always, Claire.
Yeah,
Respect and
yeah,
kindness always.
yeah,
Claire, going back to the education again for a minute,
yeah,
what do you think about the spectrum of educational provision, like be that mainstream, special class, special school, home tuition,
yeah,
currently in place here in Ireland, in the Irish context
yeah.
specifically?
Yeah, well, I suppose the current provision of inclusive education is being looked at closely at the moment, and like we may be moving towards kind of a different model of inclusion. And what I think about it at the moment, I think lots of things, and I think it's a really important question, but a really, really complex question.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, it's a very, very under-resourced area in terms of people resources, in terms of financial supports, in terms of fiscal resources. So many special classes are in prefabs. That is just not okay. You know, you're supporting people that have sensory differences, and you're putting them into an environment that, broadly speaking, is not a comfortable environment from a sensory viewpoint. That's not okay. So I can't but acknowledge the fact that there are fabulous individuals in special education in Ireland at the moment, really talented, really caring individuals, and they are really keeping the show going. And often when there is an awful lot of I suppose there's not a lot of support there, you know, there's not enough funding, we're not staffed well enough. So it's a really complicated area. I would like to see children that have different access needs having a choice when it comes to their schooling.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking to see children not having choices to go to their local school, and to be bused sometimes for hours at a time to schools outside of their community. That's not good enough. We need to do better. We absolutely need to do better. In terms of training, I think it's improving, but like a lot of training still focuses on very kind of outdated theories of autism, like, central coherence, theory of mind, without adding in kind of extra stuff from Damien Milton. We need to kind of move with the times and keep up to date with the wealth of autistic research that's out there, and to make sure that the training that our professionals get is absolutely top notch. And I think there have been improvements, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. So I suppose what I'm saying is there's fabulous, talented, caring individuals working in special ed in Ireland, but the resources that are there are sadly lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. Abysmal, I suppose, is a word that comes to mind. What I will say though, Claire, is that sometimes that lovely caring person becomes the whole environment. So it doesn't, so like when you've got a person who is that passionate about creating as positive a spaces as possible, the lack of funding, the lack of tools doesn't come into play. It is the person themselves that creates that wonderful environment for the child. So
absolutely. And we have so many of those individuals, and I mean, like, that's something that if that's not there, it's very hard to fix that. I mean, you can always overlook down a heel prefab if you have really caring SNAs and teachers and school leadership that are invested in inclusive education. But it'd be great to have both.
Everything.
It would absolutely.
This is it. I suppose we've had two sides of the coin, where we've had like I have had one young person in an autism class in a prefab outside, but the teacher, and I've no doubt she'll listen in and she'll know exactly who I'm speaking about. She is just outstandingly amazing, is the only word. And it didn't matter to my daughter that she was in a prefab. It mattered to her that she felt safe, and this teacher was the epitome of safety. By comparison, I now have a younger person who is in an autism class who accesses the same staff, the same wonderful staff, but there's actually now an up-to-date OT room and this most
Yeah.
wonderful classroom and so on and so forth. So I suppose it's and again, I suppose it's that added layer of having the lovely building as well as the staff member. But I really do feel that it's important that for us to acknowledge staff like yourself, Claire, who actually make that environment what it is for the young person, and that the building and the tools come after that. Do you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is people and relationships first, Sharon. I completely agree with you. Yeah.
It is, do you know? Now, Claire, to ask you a little bit on a more personal level, I suppose. So I suppose I know that you recently contributed a chapter to an edited book on the experiences of autistic staff, and subsequently then were invited to write a second book independently. Delighted. With reference to the educational book, first of all, can you tell my listeners what's going to be covered in that and why it's such an important read from an educational standpoint?
Yeah, so this book is edited by a number of people. Rebecca Wood is the lead editor, and what they've done is they've drawn in different contributors, all neurodivergent, who have worked in schools or education in different settings. So there's a number of different viewpoints of what it is to be a neurodivergent or autistic person in education. So there'll be different perspectives, which is really important, because if you're just to read mine, you're only getting one snapshot of what it's like to be an autistic educator. So my own contribution is about being an autistic school leader and kind of my journey to becoming an autistic school leader, and what strengths I bring to the role, particularly from my experience of being autistic, and things like empathy, kind of knowledge, sometimes an eye for detail when I have kind of the spoons and the headspace to have the eye for detail, that there are definite advantages to being neurodivergent and being a school leader. So I really wanted to put a positive spin on my experiences in the education system, which as a teacher and a school leader have been overwhelmingly positive, I'm happy to say.
Fantastic. I can't wait. When do you anticipate this being available for us?
Yeah, 2022. I don't have any kind of, absolute date, but it is 2022, and I reckon early to 2022.
Fantastic. And I can let listeners know through
Brilliant.
Facebook and social media and all that when
Great
it does hit our shelves. And I suppose then, Claire, by the same vein, the book you're writing from a more personal perspective, what are you going to look at in this, and when can my listeners expect to see this one on their bookshelves?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this, Sharon. I'm really excited about this book. So what I've done is I've taken all my personal experience and professional experience and used it to write a book that's primarily aimed at parents of autistic children and young people. And in the book, I'm advocating taking a strengths-based approach to supporting children and young people, really drawing on positive psychology here. So using VIA character strengths to support autistic young people. So I've come up with a framework which I outline in the book, and the book is really kind of like a resource or a workbook that you worked through to identify, explore, and develop your child's strengths. I also have a section that looks at parents turning into self-coaches so that they can explore their own strengths in an effort to kind of enhance self-care. And in my final chapters, I look at advocacy. So once we know our strengths, how that enables us to become successful advocates and self-advocates, because self-advocacy is a skill that is so important for our young people. So I really hope this book will inspire and empower people and make a difference. And I'm hoping that that the book will be out later in 2022. Again, I've no date. It is written. It's just being sent into the publishers nearly as we speak.
Fantastic. I actually can't wait to get my hands on it, Claire. I genuinely can't. And I love the fact that you're not only like that it is absolutely coming from a strengths focused standpoint, rather than oftentimes that kind of tragedy narrative almost that we
Yeah.
oftentimes will
Yeah.
see as parents. I love that there's a focus
Yeah.
on strengths. I love the fact that it's not just focusing on strengths, though, that it is also focusing on equipping people, practically speaking, and kind of setting
Yeah.
people up for success as advocates, be they self-advocates or advocating for their children or family member or whatever.
Yeah.
So I actually can't wait to get my hands on this. I'm hoping I get a pre bookshelf copy to read and review.
We'll see
No,
what we can do.
oh no, I think that it's going to be amazing. I actually have no doubt, and I suppose I'm so aware of your work, and I'm so aware of your own values and what you bring to the table with respect, like with regards to that. And I suppose I can state without, very, very seriously, without reading the book, that it will 100% be an absolutely essential read for any parent or educator of autistic children.
Thanks
As I
so much,
say,
Sharon.
I will say I look forward to getting my hands on it. So I suppose, Claire, you'd be glad to know your final question. I've no doubt that it's exhausting to be listening and to be trying to formulate answers and so on.
Oh
But I
no, I'm
suppose
enjoying it.
your final question is, so I usually like to ask whether someone has any words of wisdom to share with a person either supporting an autistic child or adult, or an autistic individual navigating their own autism journey. Do you have any words of wisdom to share today?
Yeah, look, these are words that people have probably heard before, but I think there is kind of advice in them. I think number one, to be gentle. So be it if it's a new diagnosis that parents have got for a child, or if it's an adult after getting an adult diagnosis, be gentle. This is a process. It's a journey of discovery. It's a journey of self-identity or identity for your child. So just be very gentle in that process. Keep an open mind. Keep a very open mind. You'll oftentimes what you'll find is, you'll get kind of advice and kind of opinions coming from every angle. Just keep an open mind. If something doesn't sit right in your gut, be curious about that, So curiosity would be the next bit of advice, keep a sense of curiosity. I really think autism is having a moment in research. There's so much good research coming out. I think what we know now is very different to what we knew 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I'm really excited to know what we'll know in 5 years' time. And really try and find a community, whatever works for you. Like, I'm not a fan of Facebook, so that's not for me, but I would I'd have a parents WhatsApp group, I have a autistic teachers WhatsApp group that works for me. And just have a support network, have a strong support network. And just really stay positive about a diagnosis. A diagnosis is information. It's giving you more information about how to be and how to move forward. It's part of a plan, So just that's kind of my general advice, Sharon. That real be gentle, open, curious, is the advice.
Claire, thank you so much for having a conversation with me today. I have to say, I've really enjoyed speaking with you.
Yeah, likewise, Sharon. No, it's been a pleasure. The time has flown. And it's always lovely to talk to you.